How is life in Korea compared to like back in America?
It took me about 2 years, 2.5 years, for me to stop saying I hate Korea.
You said you worked corporate job like in Korea. Like how was that experience for you?
I think the biggest thing that was difficult for me, I think it also might be a personality thing, but asking questions. Like Koreans are super scared to ask questions.
How many languages do you speak?
I speak four. So Korean and Japanese, English and French. Konnichiwa. 私の名前は Nadia です。日本に住んでたのは Je m'appelle Nadia. J'ai étudié à Lyon. C'était depuis 4 mois.
Can you briefly tell me about your background?
Yeah, so my name is Nadia Park, and I am a Korean American, born and raised in the States, and I came to Korea 2019 after graduating college.
Why did you decide to move back to Korea?
So it wasn't really my choice at first. So my parents immigrated to the States before I was born. My dad did his PhD in the States, and then I grew up basically my entire life in the States, never imagined myself to ever live in Korea. It was just kind of where my grandparents lived. But in 2016, after my freshman year, my father's company wanted him to move to Korea for a year and have him work here at the office and then go back to the States. And so my parents said, you know what, we need the change. Why not come back? But that 1 year ended up becoming now like 8-9 years. And in that, I became strangely an international student where I had to come home to Korea every single summer break, winter break, which was exhausting coming back and forth from Philadelphia. But I did that, and eventually, once I graduated, I needed to go back home, and home ended up becoming not San Francisco area where I was raised, but Korea. And so, yeah, I became this international student, and when I came back to Korea after graduating, I gave myself 3 months to find a job back in the States. But during that 3 months, I found coffee. I was only going to learn coffee for about a month in particular cafe that I met my teacher. But the more I learned about coffee, the more I discovered the depths of coffee. I realized I needed to learn more, and I couldn't stop with just 1 month of studying. Like that wasn't gonna give me anything. And I wanted to use this opportunity to use coffee as a tool for me. For example, like using filmmaking or developing blacksmithing, which is not really a skill used these days, but having that skill in your pocket will help you survive no matter what in the future. Like, for example, if I perhaps lose my corporate job, at least I can set up a coffee shop. And so that was kind of my idea behind it. And so I decided to pause on the whole going back to the States to find a corporate job because I felt like that was something that I could do eventually anyway. And first develop and get into coffee first and feel confident about the skill before I went back. So that started off with 3 months, and then it ended up being a whole year. And after a year, I wanted to actually go back to the States. It's been a year since I graduated. It's time for me to find a corporate job. And the reason was to set up a coffee business in the future. By going to a corporate job, I felt that would help me understand big businesses and corporate business, things like that. And so I worked at Naver for about 2 years, and I quit my job after that because I decided, hey, this isn't good enough. I can't learn anything that's going to help me develop a business. And so I decided to, I take the leap of faith and just try doing my own business.
Where in America did you grow in?
So I was born in Minnesota, and then I moved to the California Bay Area when I was around 5 years old. I lived there in a small city called Dublin till the end of my high school, and then I moved to Philadelphia and went to University of Pennsylvania for my college.
What did you study?
Communication.
As an Asian American, Korean American, how was growing up like in America for you in general?
I think the biggest stereotypes and the prejudice that I received in the beginning was when I was in elementary school. I remember people asking me like, oh, are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? And the last thing they would ask me was, are you Korean? Of course, the ching-chongness and the eyes, all of those was just kind of natural. I remember my mom telling me a story about how when I was in Minnesota, especially in that area, Asian people were very hard to find. And so at that point, I was at the playground playing, and this grandma, she came up to me and she was like, wow, I've never seen an Asian girl before. Can I touch her hair? Like, I've never seen black hair before. And my mom was like, what? Yeah, sure. So that's a story I think that really kind of showcases that. And then of course I think it was only until Kim Yeona won the Olympics that people kind of understood Korea. So in my mind I was very thankful for her winning because I think it opened up the rest of the world to, oh, there's this country called Korea. And so, so the first question is, are you Korean? And so I think that was the biggest change. Other than that, of course, I get like the stare when I go to areas that have less Asian population. But growing up in California, I think there was much less of that.
How is life in Korea compared to like back in America?
It took me about 2.5 years, for me to stop saying I hate Korea. And I think it was mostly because there were so many things that I knew about Korea versus my American culture that I was never going to understand. One of those things was how nosy people are here. Like everyone is up in your business. Like the first question everyone asks is, how old are you? And in the States, like everyone's friends and there's no like 언니, 오빠, there's no like levels of those like ages, even like 1 year. If I don't call someone 언니 because she's like several months older than me, people around her, even if she's okay, will be like, why doesn't she call you 언니? Like that's so weird. I'm like, okay, now I have to start calling you 언니 just because you're like 4 months older than me or whatever it is. Which I think is a little hard for me to understand. And that's kind of why I avoided Koreans in the States, actually, because I was scared of that 선배 and 후배 kind of relationship. I didn't want to like bow to people who were like 1 year older than me. Like it wasn't something I was used to. And I didn't feel like that was necessary in America. But here, respecting your elders is of course something that I also, need and want people to do. But I think some people take advantage of that too much. I went a little off tangent, but yeah, the nosiness about how you've lost weight, how you've gained weight, how old you are, what you're doing right now, what your marital status is, all of that people need to know. And if not, someone is going to find out through other people because the world here is so small the longer you live in Korea. And when I first started working my corporate job, I didn't realize how small Korea was. People were like, oh my gosh, like you're friends with my friend, like in the workspace. It was so easy to find people who knew people like one step away. Now I think I have developed enough of a connection where I'm in that place. And so that's why I think a lot of people in Korea are a lot more cautious of how they're acting towards other people, with other people, or with alone, just because they know that just one step away, they're going to be connected with someone. And I think that's why people are a lot more cautious, and that's why they have so much more 눈치. And that's something that I didn't have as much in the States, but now it's kind of a trained experience where I didn't have as much of that 눈치, and now I have too much. And so I don't know how to find that balance of like being myself, but also being cautious of other people.
And you said you worked corporate job like in Korea. Like how was that experience for you?
I think the biggest thing that was difficult for me, I think it also might be a personality thing, but asking questions. Like Koreans are super scared to ask questions because they find that as one, defying the order of the upper person, or two, it distracts the focusing or it just takes away time from other people, especially if you ask questions in a shared space, like in a meeting. And so I wasn't afraid to say, oh, why is that? Why is this important? What is my role in this? Like I asked a lot of why questions, and I think in a Korean workspace, you're kind of just supposed to do what you're told to do. But for me, it was kind of like, I don't know why I need to do this. Like, what's the big picture? Like, if you don't share with me the big picture, like, I can't get any work done. And so I think people are scared of that question. And they're like, why? You can just do what I ask you to do. Like, people are trained here. For example, if it's a multiple choice question, I'm asking you to answer this question. There's choice A, B, C, D, and I know as the boss that you're supposed to give me C. But B is also a decent answer. So it's like, what's the most best answer kind of question? But for me, I thought B was, from my logic, my reasoning, the best answer. But when I confidently provide B, my boss is like, no, you're supposed to give me C, what are you doing? And completely ignores all the effort and thought process that went into B. So I think for the longest time, I wasn't sure. It was my first corporate job ever. So the first corporate job wasn't in the States, it was in Korea. And so I think I was very confused on, am I wrong or am I different? And so trying to find that balance, I think took 6 months. And eventually I decided, you know what, I don't need to feel like I'm wrong. I'm just different. And if that doesn't work with me here in a culture in the Korean culture, then I'm gonna leave.
Growing up in America, which language did you use like at home?
Yeah. So my mom is pretty bad with languages. Yeah, she and I always really spoke Korean. I remember one time, I think it was ninth grade, I was coming home from school and I was super excited about something and I was talking to her like really, really quickly in English because, you know, when we're excited, I speak in the language I'm most comfortable in, and that was English. And she was like, and I was like, Mom, do you understand what I'm saying? And she's like, 아니? Oh, my mom doesn't understand me. She's just pretending to understand me whenever I'm speaking English. So at that point, I decided, okay, my mom and I are only going to speak Korean. And of course, with my father, when there was, you know, things about school or more professional things, I talked to him in English. But most of the time, it was Korean. My dad listened to Korean music. The TV that we watched was mostly Korean. Like we barely watched American TV shows. Going to school back and forth, I used to carpool with friends, and the radio would turn on, and it was American music, of course. And I didn't know a lot of it unless it came out at like a dance party. Then I would have never heard of it. Like I don't know who the artist is. I don't know who the name of the song. So it was very Korean for an American living in the States.
그럼 혹시 한국말 어떻게 배우게 되셨나요?
한국말은 그냥 자연스럽게 가족이랑 했고, 외할머니가 얘가 나중에 한국에 놀러 오면 한국말을 못하면 어떡하지? 걱정을 많이 하셔가지고 미국으로 책이랑 비디오 테이프나 진짜 많이 보내주셨어요. 그래서 스티커 같은 거 막 의자, 뭐 이런 여러 테이블, 뭐 이렇게 여러 가지 붙이고 영상 엄청 보고 그렇게 했기 때문에 좀 좋아졌고, 발음이 되게 어려워요. 아시겠지만 너무 한국어 발음이 너무 어려워가지고 그거는 여기에 와서 많이 좋아진 건데, 영어를 하다가도 한국말 하면 좀 이상해지고 막 영어 사투리가 나오고 좀 그렇긴 해요. 아직까지도.
아니 너무 자연스러운데요.
많이 연습했습니다.
Wait, how many languages do you speak?
I speak 4. So Korean and Japanese, English and French. Yeah.
And can you probably just like simply introduce yourself like in those languages?
こんにちは。私の名前はナディアです。日本に住んでたのは何年だろう。2006年1年だけだったんですけど、名古屋に住んでて、それから自分で勉強して、いろいろもうエネメとか翻訳もして勉強しました。Japanese was actually more comfortable at one point than Korean, and that's because I learned with textbooks. So whenever I went to Japan, ordering online and ordering to people was easier. But Korean, I was super scared because I never learned how to order. It was kind of like, what do I say? Like, 이거 주세요? Like, what else do I say? And so for the longest time, Japanese was a lot more comfortable. But yeah, I'm a bit rusty in those other languages. French is my second language in school. And so that was kind of a hard-trained language, so I'm not very good at it. But I did go to Lyon for my study abroad.
Can you still remember how to introduce yourself in French?
Je m'appelle Nadia. J'ai étudié à Lyon. C'était depuis 4 mois. Oui, c'était une bonne ville, une beau ville. Je veux aller à Lyon une autre fois. Ouais.
What were some, like culture challenges you've experienced like just growing up like in both cultures?
I think I was always very cautious of the dual identity, and I think all Asian Americans go through that. Anyone actually with any 2 cultures growing up in the States, like if their parents are immigrants especially. I was never confident when I was growing up that I could be like my parents and instill onto my children the Korean culture, and I was scared of that. Like I knew it was natural that if I lived in the States, my parents, the amount of Korean knowledge is, of course, not as much as I have. And so it'll go away eventually the longer I stay in the States. And if my children are like 4th generation, 5th generation, longer it goes. But I really loved the Korean culture and I wanted to keep that. And so I think that's why, compared to a lot of my Korean friends, like, of course, there are people who, are like me and they delve into the culture. We love our K-pop, we love our K-dramas, and so we are perfect at speaking Korean. But I think for more so than others, I think I was trying to maintain that within me as much as possible. But at the same time, whenever I came to the States, speaking English itself in the beginning, like when I was young, whenever I spoke English, people would like look at me weird. And then vice versa, like living here in Korea, I'm like, I don't feel Korean. But people are treating me and telling me that I should be like more Korean.
You found your love for coffee and all that. So like, how did you, like find a way to express yourself like through your coffee making skill and all?
The initial start of that Instagram was I realized that working a corporate job and things like that, I knew that I needed to do my own business, that I wanted to do something for myself. Because working a corporate job, I'm only helping the CEO. And that's not going to, it's not an insurance for the rest of my life. Whatever I do is my insurance for the rest of my life, which is why I wanted to do business so badly. And coffee, I think, was, once I found this particular pour over hand drip method, I said, this is the product that I'm going to run with, let's do it. And the Instagram kind of was, hey, I make coffee every day at the cafe for myself. Why not like film it? So in the beginning of my Instagram, it was just me pouring and like visuals of the hand drip. And then eventually I realized that with Instagram algorithm, honestly, it was kind of like if you add your own voice, if you add a face, then it helps with the algorithm. And so I was like, okay, well, let's try to talk about something. And I'm a very like touchy-feely kind of person. And so I think that's kind of why I was like, let's touch people's hearts somehow. And I originally wanted to say all of those things for myself. It was never for other people. I quit my job and I was scared. I was scared that I was going to not succeed. I was scared that this wasn't going to work out. I was scared that this might have been too hasty of a decision. And so I kind of had to train myself to say, if you don't believe yourself, then no one will. And I couldn't believe myself at the time. And so all of those positive messages that I was putting out on the internet were messages that I wanted to just tell myself. So from the books, the podcasts, audio lectures, people, mentors that I was meeting up with, I was receiving all of these, good hints and positive messages. And so I, in my own way, kind of organized that and put that in like a little mini short story for myself and said, hey, Nadia, don't compare yourself to others. Nadia, have these absurd dreams. Nadia, these things I was telling myself. And I think that's why we were talking about earlier that authenticity kind of went through the camera and people understood, oh, wait. So it was more of a message to myself and it wasn't me telling anyone to do anything. And I think that's why people were more intrigued and actually listened to it. Because I actually don't like motivational videos either. I don't look at them like, so what? You're not going to help my life in any way. Like, I still have to live my life. 100%. And do you believe that yourself kind of thing? But for me too, like those messages, like I'm not fully 100% positive every single day. But I think by telling myself those kinds of messages, I'm very, very good now at getting back up. Even if I fall down, because now I know like where I'm going and why I'm doing it, and just like having that really big dream in coffee, in life or whatever, helps me to get back up.
As a coffee maker, you've tasted like 1 billion coffees. Which countries do you think have the best coffees?
Are we talking about like the green beans, like the actual beans, or like process, like roasted?
Both. All of you. Just tell me all of them.
So basically, I would like to say, first of all, there's no particular region that's the best. I think it's mostly how it's processed and then the nature of the land. There's the coffee belt, which kind of lies in the center of the earth, and that's where most of our coffee comes from. So if you have Arabica beans that are hand-picked, aka beans that like people go and, when we go like cherry picking or peach picking, we try to find the best ripened ones, and those taste the best. And coffee is the same thing. If you do a huge plantation and farm, people can use like vacuum and trucks to like scrape all the beans down. But if the workers actually go and take out one at a time, you're going to have the sweetness and acidity shine through that coffee and it'll stay very consistent. Whereas if you're just like vacuuming all the coffee beans in, you're going to have rotten beans, you're going to have less ripened beans, and so that will decrease the quality quite a bit. There's also natural process and wash process, and so I think wash process takes another step forward, which is why it's more expensive. And so there's all these different processes that make a coffee more expensive. But the biggest thing I think is, was it from a ripe cherry, and was it hand-picked? Because in that process, it won't have all the rotten coffee cherries in it. Because I roast myself, these are the things that I like have to think about if I want to provide it. But for me, I think as like a skilled roaster and barista, the offerings that I want to provide is not how can I find the most expensive, good quality beans and give them to the customer at like a good price? It's more, how can I find a good combination of good beans, decent beans? Of course, there's a standard. And from there, how can I extract as much of the good flavors from that when I'm roasting, when I'm doing my hand drip, so that I can provide this like outwardly experience for my customers.
Which country do you think has the best coffee for like the regular coffee goers that don't really know much about coffee?
When you're trying to decide between like Kenya, Ethiopia, there's a lot of those, Guatemala, the best coffee, like I'm more of an African coffee style person personally, just because the Latin American coffees have a little bit of that volcanic smoky taste to it, and I prefer chocolate sweetness. And I think I find that a lot more in the African coffees. If you're talking about which country has the best like flavor of like just a cup of coffee, I think it really depends on whether you like your espressos, because if you go to Italy and actually have their espresso, it tastes good. But if you try to bring that same coffee back home, it's not going to taste as good. So you have to go to that country, because the way that they brew their coffee based on the water, based on the their skills is different. And so for me though, I think Korea has been really good with developing specialty coffee. No matter where you go, you can find okay coffee now.
And do you see yourself like living in Korea for like a very long time?
So my goal right now is 5 years. 5 years is my goal, to stay in Korea, develop my businesses, and then eventually go to the States and do the same thing there. Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you see yourself like staying in Korea, like settling in Korea?
The educational system. Like if I have a kid, I want them to grow up in the States and get that educational process there. Mm-hmm. Just because I'm used to that, and I do think that there's a lot more. This is really controversial, but I think there's a lot of critical thinking that people are able to do in the educational system in the States. And I think that's why a lot of Korean people, if they have enough money, they send their kids abroad.
How would you describe Korea to someone that hasn't been out here before?
That's a good question. It's fast and it's super trendy. And so if you come here, there's always something that's poppin' and trendy, which will die down eventually. But I think it's super fun to see trends come and go really quickly. It's the same with fashion. The way that we see fashion as like summer SS season or fall winter season kind of thing, Korea is the same thing. For example, one moment espresso bars will be poppin'. Another time maratang, or like mara, the noodles is super poppin'. And so being able to see those fast-paced trends is really cool. Interior also is really, really nice to watch. A cafe interior is like a huge thing on Instagram. People want to visit these different really cool places that, like, even if you come this year, in like 2 years, Korea will be completely different. Yeah. And so being able to see a different view of that, I think, is really cool. And of course, the normal like Korean like desserts and culture that you can find in like the traditional Korean culture like areas, like Bukchon, Hanokmaul, for example, like, or Jeonju, if you go there, also have like Korean sweets and food is just really good.
Thank you for your time today.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much.